Hey guys, thank you for joining today for the first session of a four-part Openlabs introduction series. My name is Jamie Thorson, and today we will be doing a general introduction to what Openlabs is, how to use it. But before we get started, there's just some general housekeeping to go over. If you have a question, please submit questions to the GoToWebinar console. These will be tracked and all questions will be answered at the end. Then slides and recordings will be shared out after the webinar. The agenda for today is we're going to go over what Openlabs is at a high-level overview as well as how it got started. We're going to go over open source, basic open source contributions, as well as how it relates to Cloud Elements, contributing and use to our Openlabs organization, what it looks like now and what you can expect for the future, and then that will make time for those questions that are submitted before we conclude. So to begin with, what is Openlabs and how did it come to be? Openlabs is an open source organization with a handful of different repos. The intention of it is to help developers go faster when creating integrations. It originally started with sharing internal knowledge to help speed up our own engineers. So our professional service organization was finding that we were solving difficult problems, and every time we'd run into a similar or the same difficult problem, we were having to resolve it. So we started creating a way for us to share the knowledge internally so that we could speed up our engineers and our performance. As we began doing this, we also noticed that our customer support team and our implementation team were seeing similar questions to what our own internal teams were facing. So we began making various repos that had useful tools to help our customers through these difficult problems. And over time, we realized we needed to combine these into a single organization. And all of these repos under a single organization became what is now Openlabs. So we're going to check out the Openlabs organization, and this is where we're going to spend most of the webinar. This is the Openlabs organization. So when you sign into GitHub Openlabs, you will see these repos: formulas, Vdrs, the Doctor, Heimdall, and Elements. And I'm going to take some time to go through each of these. So within each of these repos, there should be a license, which we use an MIT license, and there should be a README. The README explains the intent and the purpose of that particular repo. So the one I'm starting with is the Elements repo. And for those of you who are familiar with Element Builder, in Cloud Elements, when you register, you get access to 140 plus pre-built elements. But in addition, we have Element Builder that allows you to build your own elements. And this is where we can share and harness some of those elements that our engineers, our customers, and our partners are all building. So a lot of these elements that you see in this repo don't exist in our public catalog, but this way you have even more access to elements that you might need. So this README will explains to you how to use elements, and how to use, and the intention of the repo, as well as contributing guidelines, disclaimers, code of conduct, and any other relevant information. So if I was an outside user and I wanted to contribute an element or use an element from this repo, and this is going to be a review for people who are familiar with Git and GitHub, but I want to make sure to go over it because not everyone has familiarity with these. So if, as an outside user, in order to use this, I would first have to fork this repo. So when you fork a repo, what this is essentially doing is taking all of this information and making a copy of it in your personal GitHub. So right now, this Elements repo lives under the Cloud Elements organization. But when I fork it, it then lives under my organization. So if I went to my profile in GitHub and I looked at my repositories, I've already forked this one, and so I have this Elements repo in my personal one. And if I click on this one, you can see that this is now under the Jamie T Elements And then in addition, you can clone this, which I've already done, but I'll show you how. You would grab this, this clone link, and in your terminal, you can create, go to the place where you want to create the repo. So I have mine in Openlabs, and then you would just type git clone, and then you would put that link from the from right here, and that's how you would clone the repo. Now, like I said, I've already cloned it, so I'm not going to clone it again. But if you look at my setup, I already have the elements repo under my Openlabs. And so then now I can access it locally on my own environment. And then I can, from there, contribute, edit, and then push back to my GitHub repo and make a pull request, which will have to go across forks. So if I was on my repo and I wanted to create a pull request if I had made a change, which currently I haven't, so it'll tell me that, but you can see that I can set the head to my JMET element and then base it to the Cloud Elements Openlabs repo so that I can push back to the Openlabs organization, even though it lives and my changes are made on my personal repo. In addition, I can open the elements and oops, it didn't pop up. Hang on a second. There it goes. And get access to all of these elements that exist. So I opened it with Atom. You can use whatever you're most comfortable with. But in here, if I look at these elements, every element will have a README and at least an element JSON, if not additional information. So in this README, you can see a link to the vendor documentation. So if I was going to use this element and I wanted to extend it or add additional resources, or even just use the ones that exist, it might help me to see the endpoints documentation. So when you contribute or when you use one that's already there, we ask that you add this vendor documentation, you put the resources, and this is in Markdown. So if you view it on the actual repo, it looks, I'll also show you what it looks like there. It looks formatted differently, but you can see the resources that are available. And in many cases, we ask that you put what CRUDs are available. So if it's just create, or you'd put like post accounts. It's not true for all of them because they're contributed by a variety of people. But whenever possible, it helps to see what's available and what actions are available with those resources. And then any API limitations. So this could be rate limits that you know about. This could be oddities and behaviors of that endpoint, et cetera. You would want to document that just so that anyone who then wants to use this element knows what to expect. So if I wanted to use this element, now that I have this on my local machine, I can actually access this within Cloud Elements. So let me go to my Cloud Elements tab. This is my current Cloud Elements, and if I search the Elements catalog, you can see I don't have Billy. But I saw in Openlabs that there was a Billy element, so let's say I wanted to add it here. I could click this Build a New Element button, and then I can import it. And I'm going to import it from my computer because I have that repo under Openlabs, Elements, and Billy's. And then I just grab the element JSON, so this is the Billy JSON, and I open it, and then I can just continue to import. And what this will do is take all of those resources that are available and make them available to me. So I can select the ones I want, or I can just select all of them and then import the element. After the element is imported, I'm able to work with it. I can authenticate, use any of these resources that are there, and see it in my catalog. So here, now that I've added it, you can see the base URL that it's hitting. Again, in the Cloud Elements Openlabs repo, I could go look at the documentation. These are the resources that you have available. And so if I was using this element but then saying, yeah, it had all these great resources, but it didn't have credit cards, and that's what I'm actually interested in, at least now I have a starting place. So I have an element that has authentication set up, and all I have to do is add one more resource, like credit cards, and then link it to whatever the vendor resource is. Like if it was also credit card, then maybe I only need a get, so I would just click that, and I can add that additional resource, and then you're already ready to go, rather than having to start from scratch and build the entire element. So that's sort of how you would use the elements that already exist in the repo. Similarly, if I had an element, like let's say I was the one who built Billy, or let's say I just added that endpoint and I want to contribute back, I can then export this, and what that will do is export a formula JSON, and that formula JSON can be used to put that back in your local environment, and then push it to your repo to make the pull request. So that way you can grab an element from the repo, make changes, and then push it back. So that's how you would interact with the elements repo within this Openlabs organization. So I'm going to do an overview of all of these various repos, a light overview, but also this is a 4-part webinar series, so the other 3 will go more in depth on some of these that are more complex. So this is more of a high-level overview just to get you started. So the next one I'm going to go over is formulas. Our formulas repo, so a lot of formulas are used, for those of you who haven't used a lot of formulas are a way to connect data without writing code on your programs or on your servers. You can actually write integrations through our formulas and create integrations within Cloud Elements. So we don't have any, currently we don't have any full formulas, so I don't have in this repo something like get contacts from CRM1 and post to CRM2 full integration, but I have little examples of how you would use a formula. So these are some of, like right now what's existing in here is get all results from a loop stuff. So essentially that would be in a formula, if I need to aggregate data from a looping step, how would I do that? So I'm just going to jump into this one. So in each formula, it's similar to elements that there's a README, and that should explain why you would use this. So if I was an outside user and I'm like, well, is this what I actually need to do? I can kind of read, this is the problem it solves. So this is the problem, and then the solution is written there in the README for me to understand if this is the best use case for the problem I'm trying to solve. In addition, there should be JSON, the formula JSON, so that you can import this formula in the same way that we imported elements. And then the one unique thing about formulas is that there's also this flowchart that we generate. So for example, I have opened one of the flowcharts, this flowchart in fact, in another tab. And so this is the loop step aggregation when I open that file. So in the same way, I would fork this repo, clone it to my local machine, and then I can open that file in my browser. And when I open that file in my browser, I see something like this. And what this is a flow of that actual formula. So if I didn't want to cloud up my Cloud Elements account, I could look at this formula from the workflow before actually putting it into my account. So here, if you hover over the steps, you get a little bit more information. So for example, the trigger step is a manual trigger for this formula. It's asynchronous, and then it will, if this is successful, to go to the next step. The next step is get contact, which shows it makes an API call to contact. It's associated with a variable, which is an element instance, and the method is get. The next one takes the steps.getContacts response body, and it loops through it. And as you loop through it, it goes to this aggregator. And the aggregator is the part that makes this formula example useful. This shows you how to aggregate the data. So for this particular example, it's telling you that this is a JavaScript step that's checking if it's already hit this step. So the first time it hits the step, it creates an empty array. And then from then on, it pushes into that empty array. So as it loops through this contact step, it's actually pushing the data into that array. and then it finishes and ends gracefully, and you have all that data. So if I was building a formula, I might not need this exact formula. Maybe I'm not getting contacts and looping through them, but what I might be trying to do is solve a problem in which I need to aggregate data. So this formula serves as a template or a starting place to explain to me how I would solve that problem. So that's kind of the purpose and intent of the formulas repo, is more of a way to solve problems that you might face while building formulas. There's not, like I said, there's not a bunch of full built formulas because of unique use cases that we see. However, we see a lot of the same types of problems within these unique use cases. And so the formulas repo aims to solve those problems. All right, so the next repo I'm going to go over is Vdrs, or virtual data resources. And this one is similar to the formulas in that many of our customers have very unique virtual data resources. So we don't have a lot of full built virtual data resources because those aren't very useful. They're not often reused. However, problems within virtual data resources or things you need to solve are often similar. So those are what we'd put into this repo. So for example, one of the problems listed here is combining objects. So if I was a user and I wanted to know what this is, again, I would click on it and I would see in the README there's a description of what this is and how to use it. So in this case, combining objects is coming up with the idea if I'm calling, for example, a customer's endpoint, and maybe each customer might have some orders, but maybe there's just a reference ID for those orders. Sure, in my own code, I could call customers and then call orders and do all sorts, or I could create a virtual data resource that calls customers and grabs their orders and combines them and just gives me the data I want back. And so this shows you how you would do that. So how do I take the customers and the orders endpoints and combine them? And it shows here that you have to make an HTTP request, and then it explains how to do that. And this image is showing that you would have to actually add custom JavaScript within that VDR, and then it explains what that JavaScript looks like and areas that are unique to this example that you would need to change for your personal code. And so that's all in the README, and most READMEs will be very descriptive like that. They should explain exactly what they're showing so that if you're using it, you can make the appropriate adjustments as needed. Then in addition, in VDRs, you'll have either a JavaScript body, if it's, in this case, just the JavaScript that you would be adding to the VDR, or you might see ones that actually have the VDR object definition and transformation, if it's showing a full example of the full-on VDR. So in this case, if I was using this JavaScript, what I'm actually doing is creating my own VDR in Cloud Elements, and then adding the JavaScript to that existing VDR. Whereas in other examples, so I'm just going to open this. So if I had a VDR here, I would actually have to I would map my own that I wanted here, and then just open this and add that custom JavaScript in here. However, some examples of VDRs might be actually setting up and defining these particular fields. So depending on the VDR, you might be actually sending an API call to post the definition, which is this left-hand side, and post the transformation, this right-hand side. And some might just be build your own definition transformation and just add this JavaScript. So that one's a little bit unique in that way. Okay, so that is the VDRs. And then the other two are kind of unique. So you'll see here, for those of you who are very familiar with Cloud Elements, you've probably heard elements, VDRs, formulas, but the Doctor and Heimdall might be more unique use cases. And this is how, and we name them differently on purpose. So if there's something that's small examples that you can use within Cloud Elements, we give it the Cloud Elements name to make it clear. If it's something more unique, that's a standalone product that can help you go faster, but isn't really part of our Cloud Elements main interface, then we give it a unique name like the doctor or Heimdall. So the doctor has its own code. It's an NPM module, a command line tool that can help you go faster, but doesn't necessarily work within our UI. You wouldn't do a small example of the doctor. The doctor is kind of a standalone. So I'm going to do a brief overview of the doctor, but the doctor is our next webinar series. So if you're interested, you might want to tune into that one, or if you need more information, particularly about the doctor. So to begin with, like I said, the doctor is an NPM tool, so you would have to start with npm install. And you can always go to npm and look up this cutil and read about it on npm as well. And then once you have installed it, you can take these setup steps. I'm not going to go through all that. I already have it set up, so I'm just going to kind of give you a brief overview. So if I have the doctor installed, which I do, I can run something like doctor accounts list. And what this does is it lists all of the accounts I've created locally using the doctor. So I have this demo, this for real, prod, etc. And I have to use my user and org secrets as well as the base URL that I'm pulling from. So the doctor can be used to download or upload information from Cloud Elements. So if I have like a staging account that I'm making a lot of changes in, maybe I want to download information from staging and then back it up in case I make a change that can't be reversed. Or maybe I want to download it from staging and then upload it to production because I'm doing changes and I want to give those to my users. You would make an account for your staging and then you'd start with downloading it. So I'm just going to give one example. And then again, if you want more information, you should attend the next series. So this one has, I'm just going to grab one from here. So I'll grab this doctor download Vdrs. And we saw that one of my accounts was demo. So I could do doctor download Vdrs, and then this is the name of the account. So that one says staging, but I'm going to do demo. And then I actually want to download mine to a directory. And this is fine. I'm just going to get rid of the .json since it's directory, and then I can go ahead and do that. Now, the demo account probably has a lot of VDRs, so it's going to think for a minute. But while it thinks, I'm going to kind of talk about what's happening. So essentially, with this, the doctor is going out and hitting that account, and then actually getting all of the VDRs that I've built, all of their definitions, all of the transformations. I can also specify by a specific name if I only want one VDR, so that if I'm like making changes to a specific VDR, I'm able to just get that information. And then once it finishes, it shows you which ones it saved. So these are all my VDRs that it went through and downloaded and saved. And so now, let's see, where did I save them to? VDR staging on my desktop. So if I was looking at my Finder and I wanted to see this, I would just go to desktop, and then I would just see here that I have this VDR staging now, and it creates that folder for you. And then I have all of the object definitions as well as the transformations that were in that account. And what's cool about this is, let's say I have Eloqua as one of my elements. Now it says, well, so that's a bad example because I actually didn't have any current ones. So Gmail. It says that for Gmail, I have this test mapping as one of my VDR transformations. So that means that in my definitions, I should also have test mapping as one of my definitions. So if I scroll down, I can see that I have test mapping, and that's the definition. And then I can go ahead and import this to my production environment or make changes in staging, and then if I accidentally break something, I can pull those back to staging. So this is a really useful tool for backing up work, migrating environments, and people also use it for like continuous integration and development. And then the last one is Heimdall, which I'm not going to spend very long on, but essentially Heimdall is a provisioning application that we built. So right now, if you were to use Cloud Elements, for every one of our elements, you still have to set up provisioning on your side. So we make it easier to connect to various APIs, but your users will still have to provide information and provision. and you might be creating a UI to do that, and Heimdall essentially handles that for you. And you'll have to host it yourself. So this goes through the instructions. It explains to you how you configure it, what you'd need to do. It's just a small amount of code that you'd add for each element instead of having to configure the whole thing. So this gives some examples, some usage. We have two methods of usage. One is less secure, but if you have a specific use case that fits under these regulations, then it might still work for your use case. But we explain why it's less secure. And then we have the more secured one that you should use for the majority of use cases, and also go through that, and then also local installation and how to set it up and whatnot. So this is just if you're trying to find an easier way to provision. And again, that's another one that we'll do a little bit more in-depth training for. Okay, so that's kind of going over the basic repo. So I'm going to go back now to the slides. Okay, so how does this fit together? So some of this I've kind of covered, but I wanted a little bit more in depth, both where you can see it visually within the Cloud Elements Openlabs organization, and then just kind of talk through it. So this, as I explained, a lot of the questions that we get when we say, oh, we now have an open source repo, a lot of people are asking like, okay, so what from the repo is useful for me? What or where do I look for the things I need? And how do I take things from the repo and apply them to my project? So again, kind of what we went over, but the repo has, or the GitHub organization has a bunch of repos, and within those repos, the READMEs will explain to you the use case, so you can determine if it's useful for your needs. You can also, hopefully by the title of each of the things within a repo, identify if it's going to meet your needs. So for example, with that combining objects, if you're like, hey, I'm really trying to combine bills and contacts, and then you saw something that said combining objects, it might ring a bell, like, oh yeah, that could be what I'm trying to do. And that's when you would open it, read the README, and see if it would help you solve your problem. And then how do I take the things I need and apply them to my project? Again, a lot of them are examples. So you might have to take the things of the repo and say, okay, I'm going to implement this, and then I'll have to adjust it for my specific use case, because again, we're all solving unique problems. But if I see, okay, this is how I combine objects, or this is how I aggregate data, then I can add that formula to aggregate data and then adjust it or add that information to my existing formula to make it useful to my exact project. So who should contribute? Anyone is welcome to contribute. That's why it's open source. Right now, we have internal developers from Cloud Elements contributing majority of the work, just because, as I said from the history slide, most of this started as an internal resource. So a lot of our contributions have been made by sales engineers, delivery engineers, implementation engineers, support engineers, or even our customer support architects. But not all of the contributions, that's just the majority at this point. We also encourage partners of Cloud Elements to contribute. Customers of Cloud Elements can and have contributed, and really you should contribute, whether that be just using what's in the repo. We put it there to try to help you guys go faster. So you can contribute just by using something or adding to something that you're using from the repo, or you can make suggestions about things that you want to see added, or you can add things yourself. All of those are ways to contribute, and we really encourage the larger community to contribute, because the more that we get people contributing, the more unique problems we can solve together. How do I contribute? This is, again, a little bit of an overview. I kind of showed you in the demo, but just to reiterate, some people are more visual learners and some people are more audio learners, so I kind of wanted to do both. So Openlabs is just a collection of repos. Each repo has a specific purpose, which is outlined in the README. All of the repos have or will soon have contributing guidelines and a code of conduct, basically saying if you're contributing, especially if you're adding to someone else's work, please do so in a way that is constructive, not destructive. So if I've added work and you want to add to that work, you're welcome to add to it, but maybe do so in a way that's not bashing the work that's already done or making someone feel like they're being put down for their contributions. Once you're familiar with the basics, you're welcome to fork a repo that you're interested in working with, or as many repos as you're interested in, and start working and helping out. If you make changes, for those of you who haven't done a lot with GitHub, if you make changes to your local repo, you don't have to worry about breaking something on our Cloud Elements organization. So I've had a lot of people who are a little bit weary about pushing their changes up because they don't really know, they're not overly familiar with GitHub, and they're worried, what if this isn't right? So just to reiterate, when you push up your changes, it'll go to your forked copy of that repo, and then you do have to make a pull request, and we have to approve it. So feel free to make radical changes, radical suggestions, and we will definitely look over them. If they don't fit the needs of the community, we'll give feedback, and it's always, again, going to be constructive feedback. And then if you've made changes and want to share back to the community, you will need to create a pull request. So, and that's what I showed you, where you have to do the cross-branch pull request. And then I'm including this, I'm not going to go too in-depth, but just because we share it in the slideshow, these are useful commands when contributing. So after you've contributed the first time, I showed you how to fork and get the repos, but the repos are constantly changing and other people are contributing as well. So you'll often want to get that most recent upstream version. So your local forked version might just have what you forked originally, and you'll want to make sure that you're getting the most current versions. So you add an upstream repository. So for the elements, I would grab that Cloud Elements, Openlabs, Elements repository URL, and then I would go ahead and git remote add upstream on my forked version, and I would add that upstream, and then I can fetch, merge it, and push as needed. So again, these are useful commands, but since it's all just regular GitHub, if you're not as familiar, GitHub does have really good documentation, and of course Stack Overflow has a lot of answers to questions, so you're always welcome to look those up or reach out to us, and we're happy to help. So why should I contribute? We're all solving difficult problems, that's the truth. API integrations are hard. So the more that we can get people contributing, the more that we can all solve our problems together. So while each of us and our customers are solving unique use cases and building unique integrations, some of the code and elements and problems overlap. So as I said before, this did start as an internal resource that we were seeing overlap even in what we were building, but then it became external because we saw those same overlaps in what other people were building. So the more we identify these problems, the faster and more efficiently we can all move. By adding examples of how you solve problems, you might also be enabling your own developers and other developers to find solutions to these problems down the road. So an example of this is just that sometimes I solve a problem, and then maybe someone from my team has the same problem later, and they don't know to ask me. They don't know that I've solved that. But if there's a place that they can look for problems that have been solved, they might even find work that I've done, even if they didn't know I had solved it. And same with your team. If your team all knows to look in this GitHub community, you can add something there, and maybe someone from your team will find that later, and it'll solve their problem. Or you, again, later will have the problem again and be like, oh, dang, I solved that. How did I solve that again? And there it is, already with examples written out for you. And then also, and I think this is, for me, one of the most important, is that you might actually be able to learn new ways to do things by submitting to the community and getting feedback. So one of the things that helps me learn the most is when I get feedback about my work. So I might come up with this cool, look what I solved, I'm going to add this to the community, and immediately someone might say, oh, that is really cool, but here's another way to do it. And I instantly learn, oh, I didn't even think of that. And that, like, giving back to the community and getting back from the community is really empowering for everyone to learn. But in addition, as I mentioned, a lot of the community is engineers from Cloud Elements, so it's experts in the Cloud Elements platform giving you feedback, which is almost like a direct review of your work for free. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of exciting to be able to contribute and get that feedback. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions that came in, so I'll read those to you. Who do I contact, or how do I reach out if I have problems or questions about Openlabs?
Yes, absolutely. So you can reach out to implementation at cloud-elements.com to get answers to questions, and that'll send your questions directly to a team of engineers. It goes through Zendesk. They'll read these. If they need to ask other people or reach out to other people in the organization, they're able to do that. But all questions can go through them.
Awesome. Can I contribute to other people's pull requests or make comments on other people's pull requests?
Yes. So if there's a pull request that someone's made that hasn't been merged yet, you're welcome to help give feedback or contribute to that pull request. You aren't actually able to merge that. Only the people within the owners of the organization are able to merge those, but you can always add to those. If someone has given feedback and then no one's changed that in a while and you know how to change it, you're welcome to grab that pull request and add to it.
Awesome. How active are your partners with contributing to Openlabs?
Currently, Openlabs actually just was released this year, so we have had a few contributions. I think they're becoming more active. We're seeing a lot more people at least using things, and slowly we've seen a few pull requests come in. It's been a slow process getting started and getting it off the ground, and we recently just added a lot of the repos. We started with just the Elements repo, so a lot of these repos have just been added to the community within the last month. So we're hoping to see more, but currently we're seeing a slow to moderate start.
Awesome. If I already have some private elements built, how do I get started on adding them to the Openlabs community?
Okay, so if you've already built some elements, you can just export those elements, and you can export them one by one using just the UI and hitting the export button when you hover over them, or you can use something like the Doctor to export all of them at once. And then when you export them, you will get the element JSON, and then you would, again, fork and clone that repo. In the directory that you cloned it, make a new folder for the elements with a clear element name that matches the endpoint that your element hits. And then add the element JSON and a README, and go ahead and push back up and make the pull request.
Awesome. Where can I learn more information about Heimdall?
If you want more information about Heimdall, then you should start with reaching out to implementation, or to if you are a current customer and have a delivery manager or a technical account manager, you can reach out to them as well. And then what we can do is either come to webinar 4 will be Heimdall, and you can learn more about that there. Or if you are in a hurry to learn more about it, when you reach out to implementations or to your delivery or technical account manager, then we will actually set up maybe a private tutorial for you.
Awesome. I think that is all the questions that came in.
Okay. Well, we got through everything really quick, so I will give you back some of your time.